Hi Marisela, you did a nice job with your series, and certainly taking inspiration from Ansel Adams is a great choice. Obviously, he's going to be one of the premier landscape photographers out there, and it makes obviously perfect sense that you would choose his work for inspiration. That said, this is the photo that you were drawing inspiration from, and one of the important things is that you make sure that photos that when you do Google searches or whatever, that the photos that are coming up actually belong to the person you think that they're coming from, rather than somebody that was inspired by that. And that's actually what happened here with this lonely tree photograph. If you look, you can see that this was entered as a photo contest, and so it's in the inspired by Ansel Adams, rather than being an actual Adams print. There were a few things that kind of tipped me off that this is not an Adams. Certainly he did lots and lots of trees, and if we just do a quick search, you can see that there are plenty of things that he actually did create. And so, I mean, even though this particular image wasn't one of his, is still perfectly fine. One of the ways that you can make sure that the image belongs to the person you think it is double check the website that's refers to. So here you can see that it goes to Ansel Adams Gallery. That's just the best way to do it. Once we look at it in detail, and I'm going to compare it to the other one, what we see in Adams' work in general is that he goes pretty high contrast. Now, he did develop the zone system, and basically that was a system that he devised. So he broke down all of the different ranges of light and brightness in an image into different zones so that he could accurately get detail from the brightest highlights down to the darkest shadows. And so when evaluating an image like this, he'd say, okay, this is probably the brightest area, and this is probably the darkest area, maybe like up here. And so he would make sure that his exposure for his negative would be able to contain all that information, and then he would do some pretty impressive maneuvers in the dark room in order to then recreate the scene as he pre-visualized it. We see, obviously, as we talked about in class, just beautiful detail. We see nice detail here in the rock. We see nice detail here in the pine leaves. And if we look at the lonely tree image that you included, we still see, nice detail. We still see nothing has blown out highlights. We get pretty bright here in these grasses. We certainly get pretty bright here in this area in the tree. And we maybe start to lose a little detail here. One of the ways that you can do it in Photoshop is if you use the little info palette and just kind of run your cursor over it, you can see those RGB numbers up here, and anything that's 000 is pure black. And as we go through, I'm actually not seeing any of that, and so that actually fits within his preferred working method. So this photographer actually did a pretty decent job of that. One of the things that I noticed, though, is that it's a little bit over sharpened, and it becomes what I call kind of crispy. And so the details here in the tree are almost, they almost have too much contrast. You definitely want them to stand out against the sky and against the background. But once you start to get this kind of detail, then it's a little bit over sharpened. And that's one of the things that happens when people are first learning to do post-processing, or if this was a phone shot, for example, then a lot of point and shoot cameras, a lot of those cameras have built-in sharpening that is already kind of on the far edge, and then a little bit tweaking in post-processing can push it over. We see a similar sort of thing here with your images. It gets a little crispy when you kind of come in here, but again, I'm not really too concerned about that. It's one of those things that it comes with practice. You did say that you had worked on your clarity a little bit, and might have been pushed a little bit too far. So, looking at your images, I think that you pointed out something really important in your essay. You said that he tried to make photos like his, Adams, by getting the perfect time of day and the quality of the picture just right. And that's exactly what he would do. He would know he would want to take a picture of a tree, for example. He would know what time of day the light was going to be just perfect. He would know what time of the season it would be just perfect. And obviously here you have the lonely tree. It's going to be fall or early winter. There's no leaves in the tree. And so obviously you would need to replicate that in yours. And so, it's the perfect time of year for that. So we're good there. In terms of lighting, what we get here is pretty directional, pretty hard lighting. Of course, we get some clouds in the sky, which is always welcome. And of course, for an assignment like this, you might not be that lucky. If you're planning this out over the course of months or whatever, you can usually find the perfect kind of cloud day, but not always. But what we see is nice hard shadows here. We get nice detail, from foreground here all the way through to the background. Of course, we lose a little bit of focus sharpness in these hills and the trees, but that's just the nature of the cameras. When we look at this one, certainly all of this dried grass makes for a very interesting composition, and I like it. But stylistically, it's kind of different from what we get going on here, and Lonely Tree. So I think these two match up a little better, only because we have nice sky. We have the tree against the sky. We get a little bit of the rolling hills, and of course, the Richland landscape isn't necessarily going to match exactly what this woman had for hers, but I think stylistically it looks pretty good. In terms of processing, I already mentioned the sharpness a little bit. I think that your overall contrast, overall exposures are very good. You said you added a little vignette, and I think that what she did is actually a reverse vignette. When I think of vignette, I think the darkening of the corners a little bit, and here we lighten up a little bit. Either way is acceptable, honestly. The idea of a vignette is to kind of change the edges so that you kind of pull the viewer's eyes back into the center. For me personally, and it's a subjective thing, I think a little bit darker is a little bit nicer than a little bit brighter, but again, that's a little bit of a subjective choice. If we look back at here at the one we're taking inspiration from, I think they went a little darker in the corners, and so that's one thing you can consider. Photoshop is a very complex program. There are a number of different ways you might do that. The easiest way would be to add a camera raw filter. And once that pops up, we go to the FX tab, and we can just add a little post-crop vignette. And you can see the slider here shows white going one direction, black on the other, and I would just darken that up a little bit. I'd probably change these midpoints a little bit too. Of course, you want these things relatively feathered. You don't want to have a really hard edge, because that just looks like it was abused in a frame, but something like that I think works out pretty nice. And so you can kind of see the before and the after. Again, it's kind of subjective, but I think that would match the original a little bit better. This one, I think, matches the original better. I think this is the more interesting of the two images that you submitted. So obviously we get the tree, we get the nice crisp detail of the the branches, lack of leaves, and that. What I really like is this background here. The rhythm that we get here from these dry grasses have a little bit of a curve to them. I don't know if there was a little bit of a breeze that day or what. It makes for a very pleasing background. And obviously the background is a little different, so I don't think it matches as well to the original. I think this one here is the more subtle of the two, and I think the stronger of the two images overall. By and large, I think you did a great job in your project. The one thing definitely is, make sure of your sources. You want to make sure that you are referring to the correct source, basically. And obviously your essay was about inspiration from atoms, and that's an appropriate place. It could have just as easily been about this woman, although that would have been a much more difficult subject to research, honestly. But being that she took inspiration from atoms as well, I'm actually fine with that. It's a matter of making sure you get your sources correct. overall, great job. Let me know if you have any questions.